What is up, everybody? So, today is going to be a special episode. For those of you who saw Fireside Fafnir, you would know that Fireside Fafnir is a new series that we're doing in which Faf does a solo video. And this is the counterpart. So, welcome to, cue my music, the Recoome Report. Alright, so for a long time, people have been asking me and Fafnir, but me specifically, to make a video about my theory between why Giselle and Kranus have a DBB together, right? So a while back when DBB was released, one of the first pairings that we saw was Giselle and Kranus, which confused a lot of people. And we actually still haven't gotten a thematic or lore-based reason for that DBB. And so I've taken it upon myself to create one. And I actually have two theories that we'll be addressing throughout this video. The first is that Giselle and Kranus are the same entity. They're the same person, right? Just a different form, right? The second theory that I have is not necessarily a theory, but more a postulate in which I say that whether or not I'm correct in the fact that Giselle and Kranus are the same person, I do genuinely believe that despite the DBB, there will be a thematic or lore-based connection between them because of a few specific pieces, right? So we're going to get started. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, I've actually put the stream chat up on the screen so that you guys can see the things that people in the stream are saying and the questions that I'm answering on stream. Because I know for you YouTube boyos, it can be a little bit confusing when I talk to the chat, the stream chat, and then continue the YouTube video. You have no idea what stream chat said, blah, blah, blah. I feel like this is going to make it a lot easier. If you do like this, let me know in the comments, because there are some changes that I could make that would make this a lot better so that you guys can be better in touch with the stream. However, if you want to be best in touch with the stream, the best way to go about it is to follow the stream. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. All right, so I have a document. It's just called Giselle is Kranus, right? And I've got a lot of important pieces written in here. And so I'm going to essentially read through this document, and if anything needs to be corrected, because it is older, I will correct it, and I'll expand on the things that I'm saying, because it's concise. It's supposed to be short, and so not everything is fully in depth as I would hope it would be. So let's get started. Ever since the release of the bonding system, alongside Dual Brave Burst, most of the DBB pairings have made thematic sense, with the exception of essentially one. And this has changed since the Vortex Arena units came out, because a lot of them don't have thematic pairings, but regardless, most of them make thematic sense, with the exception of Giselle and Kranus. Giselle and Kranus seemingly have no connection between them, both lore-wise or in really any other regard, until now with what I am proposing. So before we begin, we have to go over a few key pieces of Giselle's kit and her lore. Her leader skill, extra skill, BB, SBB, and UBB are all references to H.P. Lovecraft's mythos, in a lot of different ways as well. Though understanding that Giselle lore ties deeply in with H.P. Lovecraft's mythos, we're able to factor in some of the information that we have about Kranus and the things that he's said in order to attempt to establish a connection between them. So the first thing that I want to talk about is some of H.P. Lovecraft's creations, right? H.P. Lovecraft, for those of you who don't know, was a writer in the 20th century. He wrote what I would consider to be cosmic horror. And the best way to describe H.P. Lovecraft is that many people fear the unknown, but H.P. Lovecraft made you fear the unknowable, right? It was genuinely pretty terrifying to read some of these. And so one of the creations of H.P. Lovecraft that really caught my eye when I was looking at and thinking about Giselle is Yog-Sothoth, or Yog-Sothoth, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I use the term it because it is huge and unending, and you really can't give a gender to something that is unending and corporeal. It is a member of a race known as Outer Gods, and the Outer Gods are the highest tier of beings in the H.P. Lovecraft mythos, most of which are simply too powerful to even exist within our universe. Several of them, in fact the majority of them, exist completely independent of what we would consider to be our reality. In H.P. Lovecraft's novels, many times when he references Yog-Sothoth, he is depicted as being made up of hundreds of glowing orbs, most of which are similar in appearance to eyes, right? So we're looking at hundreds of essentially glowing yellow eyes. If you were to go back through some of the RC7 cutscenes and look at the places in which Giselle is referenced and the places in which she appears, her little thumbnail image, that you see on the screen during those cutscenes actually appears to contain some rather interesting and connected details. If you look closely, one of Giselle's defining characteristics is the jewelry and adornments that appear strikingly similar to yellow orbs, or for that matter, yellow eyes. After Dichroma, Giselle talks to the summoner about DBB and states that it would be a good idea to go back and think about iconic pairs throughout time who had a strong enough bond to release as much power as what was seen in the RC7 cutscenes, such as Xorag and Zace, Katerin and Keres. Once again, we see that all of the current bonds, except for the Vortex Arena ones, make thematic sense, except for Giselle and Kranus. So, I took Giselle's advice, and I went back through a lot. And one of the main things that I went looking back through was Void Mirage. And in there, we see that Kranus appears before the summoner in the final scene, and he utters some extremely eerie words. He says, "Where all things are born and must return to in time." Now, this statement doesn't seem very charged. In fact, when I saw it, it was very out of the blue and strange. I thought to myself, why is he saying that? He appears before the summoner, almost like the summoner is going insane and having a vision. Kranus is there, and he says this, right? He says, "Where all things are born and must return to in time." It was completely out of context. And so upon further looking, I realized that upon analysis, this quote refers to some kind of cosmic whole, the knowledge of which the summoner is not yet privy to, right? Once more, I found an H.P. Lovecraft tie-in. From the novel by H.P. Lovecraft called Through the Gates of the Silver Key, H.P. Lovecraft writes, "Yog-Sothoth knows the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the key and guardian of the gate. Past, present, future, all are one in Yog-Sothoth. He knows where the old ones broke through of old, and where they shall break through again. He knows where they have trod earth's fields, and where they still tread them, and why no one can behold them as they tread." Now, upon first glance, this doesn't seem very significant. It's almost as if the two quotes that I told you, that from Kranus and Lovecraft, don't tie in. But if you look at what H.P. Lovecraft means by saying this, he addresses two things. The first is that Yog-Sothoth knows, is, and, exists as key and guardian of the gate. And that struck me as something interesting, because if we remember back to a lot of what happens in the main story, Lucius, Tillith are always talking about the gate, something that they can access and control. However, we don't know what the gate is. In my theory, which is completely separate, but still regarding Kranus, Kranus is the gate. Kranus has such heavy tie-in to Yog-Sothoth himself that we can really consider Kranus to be the gate. And in a game with so many direct references to the gate, I think it's important to consider that these things may be tied together, right? And this once again implies a simple truth congruent with Kranus' statement. All is one in Yog-Sothoth, right? If Giselle appears to bear extreme resemblance to Yog-Sothoth, and Kranus does as well, then wouldn't that make sense that Kranus and Giselle could be the same being? Right? So that's what essentially the lowdown, right? And something that we need to understand about Kranus is the theory behind him, the story that is established by Gumi as, global exclusive lore, right? And the TLDR is that Kranus is a shard of the Vortex that was found in Dragar's mind that drove him insane, right? And I don't want to get in any further because it can be a little bit confusing to go back and address the wonkiness that is Aethan Sphere lore. If you're interested, there's a lot of riffs, the Soulbound Saga, interesting things that you can look into, and the character pages on the wiki that I wrote. So, essentially what we see here is an unending vortex and Giselle who bears slight resemblance, but with the introduction of their DBB together, it seems very likely that something like this is true. Now, I'm sure I know what you're thinking. Dude, that's the most far-fetched theory I have ever heard, and you don't buy it, right? I respect that. So, let's look at theory 2, what I call the definite tie-in. There is a quote from H.P. Lovecraft when he is referencing something called Azathoth, right? And Azathoth is essentially the eldest of the outer gods. He created them, he created everything. And he has an interesting quote that he references. And before I read the quote, I want to say that we have Kranus, who is considered to be a sliver of an unending void, right? A void that fills in between all things, the vortex itself, right? Connecting all worlds between each other. And for all intents and purposes, Azathoth is the exact same. They both fill in these strange gaps between realities and universes and transverse through them. It's very interesting, almost as if Azathoth has no order. They call him the blind idiot god because he doesn't know what he's doing. He has no direction, which is the same of the vortex. And only when given sentience, by being given a body from Gazia, did Kranus gain sentience, right? So in this theory, we are comparing Kranus, or the void that he came from, to Azathoth, the blind idiot god. So here's theory 2, the definite tie-in. There's a quote from H.P. Lovecraft in reference to Azathoth in which he says, "Outside the ordered universe is that amorphous blight of nethermost confusion, which blasphemes and bubbles at the center of all infinity. The boundless demon sultan Azathoth, whose name no lips dare speak aloud and who gnaws hungrily in inconceivable, unlighted chambers beyond time and space, amidst," and here's the important part, "amidst the muffled, maddening beating of vile drums and the monotonous whine of accursed flutes." Now, first of all, cool quote. Sounds awesome. But that's not the important part. For those of you who have done Raid Class 7, which I assume is the majority of you, you would know that Giselle has a sphere that can be crafted called Reparatrice. And in the first place, this sphere is actually most likely named after a story by H.P. Lovecraft. But the lore for Giselle's sphere says something very interesting. It says a charming, well-crafted hair clip of unknown metal belonging to Giselle. The eerie emerald gem set prominently at its base seems to reflect your bewildered gaze. You're not quite sure why such an innocuous item would provoke anxiety, but suddenly you hear it. Vague strains of flutes playing the same thin, monotonous note, accompanied by a slow drum beat that seems to mimic the living pulse of something far beyond your knowledge. Giselle, you think, is truly a woman of mystery, though at this point you're starting to wonder if she was ever human to begin with. That is what I would call the definite tie-in, because I genuinely see nothing that pulls away from the fact that Kranus is a form of Azathoth, because if you really look into Brave Frontier, it is riddled with H.P. Lovecraft references, which actually would probably make a good video on its own. But if we're comparing him to that, there is a direct quote, essentially what is a copy and paste with slight paraphrasing in Giselle's sphere lore, right? So that's really all I have to talk about when it comes to Giselle and Kranus. Okay, so what we're looking at is two theories, either that Giselle is Kranus, and that's why they have a DBB together, or that there is a definite tie-in, unknown where or why or how it will be done, but there is a definite tie-in between Giselle and Kranus. That's pretty much all I have to say on that subject. So, Graveler28 in the chat says, "What really confuses me is the thing behind him, the half-arc with weird gems supposed to be, and the tubes coming out of his shoulders too." So that actually doesn't really have a whole lot to do with Kranus, I believe. I think it has more to do with the design that Gazia gave him, right? When Gazia molded a body for Kranus, he probably wanted it to look pretty aesthetic, considering the fact that he had literally created one of the most powerful beings in existence. Alright, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this Recoome report. I know it was short. I wanted to keep it short and digestible, okay? So a couple of things that I want to say before we go. Like and subscribe and all that, good stuff. But if you have any ideas, any comments on the theory, or anything that you want to say to me, leave it down in the comments. I love responding to comments on our videos just because you guys have some really interesting stuff to say. So with that, I really appreciate it, and despite Fafnir not being here, I do still want to say it, so fucking chicken.